Welcome to Order Militaris Radio TV. We are lifelong Catholics, and what we do is all for free, and for our love of Jesus Christ, and for our Holy Mother, the Church. We'll defend our Holy Mother, the Church. Today's topic is on the psychological warfare program that went on for 9 years, from 1953 on through the Second Vatican Council. And we're going to give you some highlights. And we welcome Brother Alexis to the show.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on Order Militaris Radio TV. It's always a pleasure, and it's extremely interesting, this series we do, exposing the U.S. government's takedown of the Catholic Church. And we began this series talking about how the Doctrinal Warfare Program was declared in 1953. And we did, up until this today, we've done all backstory. Who are the people involved? Who are the actors? Now we're going to actually talk about the program itself. And so it's to take down the Catholic Church by contacting movers and shakers in the church and changing their ideas so that they put the church on the course of serving the agenda of American foreign policy and international Freemasonry. So their big first effort was 1954, the year following the decision to start such a project. And that took place when and where, and what was it about?
It began on May 15th to the 16th, 1954, at the Princeton Inn, where they worked and talked about the World Economic Plan.
And who are some of the people who attended that conference?
Yeah. There were representatives from the Department of Commerce, Department of Treasury, the Atomic Energy Commission, United States Information Agency, MIT, a number of banks, including Chase National, various think tanks, Harvard University, United Steelworks, and a special note, Allen Dulles, the director of the CIA.
And was Jackson at this meeting?
Yes, he was the one who called it and hosted it.
And this was in his capacity as part of the Eisenhower administration.
Yep.
And it's at this meeting that Jackson launches the idea about Gladio, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, before we get to the quote where he launches it, we did a whole program on Gladio, and that will be in the show notes. Gladio is a paramilitary ideological organization that the US government used to control organizations in Western Europe and spread to both the Mideast and to the United States, where so-called conservative groups, many of whom are Christian, are actually funded and controlled directly or indirectly by the CIA. So what did Jackson say at this Princeton conference that was so crucial?
Yeah. So according to C.D. Jackson, psychological warfare, that is, getting people to want to carry the torch, as C.D. put it, was very important in re-engineering traditional societies to want what Americans wanted them to want. In quoting from Jackson, if there has been one thing to point to as the great failure of our propaganda or psychological warfare, or whatever the hell you want to call it, abroad, it has been that we have not succeeded in generating it or in stimulating within those countries the little groups of natives who would be willing to carry the torch, and on whom we could rely just in the same way as conversely the commies have found the American natives and the French natives and the English natives to carry their torch.
Notice how he's using the word native, which in American English is kind of a derogatory word, meaning you backward local peasant, one way or the other. And this is a really good description of Gladio. Gladio is all kinds of organizations, from Forza Nova, which is the far right part in Italy, to the Red Brigade, which is the far left part, terrorist organization. And Gladio was the name of the organization. In Italy, it was called the Stay Back Program, and it was coordinated in Western Europe by NATO and US military high command, and used a lot of paramilitary, and that's behind all these far right and far left groups in Europe. You're always going to find paramilitary, former members of the military, because they leave the military and they go on to work in Gladio. And at one point, something like 3,000 political and cultural leaders in Italy were getting monthly paychecks from the CIA. It might still be going on. That's just in Italy. So imagine for all Western Europe, we're talking about 10, 20,000 people getting paychecks from the CIA to make sure that their country stays on the course, carries the torch. Mm-hmm. And this is what you call bad Americanism, but it's not really Americanism, it's Freemasonry. So,
yeah. So then we see something happening in our day and age where ships aren't being unloaded and a crisis is being created. Well, it so happened they talked about it there at the Princeton Conference. The discussion shifted to food and how its consumption was an important part of the American plan to keep and extend economic power. C.D. Jackson said, "Food is one of the great weapons that we have." And one of the speakers was Anderson, was even clearer. "We will have to find some new scheme for subsidizing the consumption of food. So what we give away represents, in effect, a carefully designed program to create the consumption in those places where we know it is low now and where we think we can get actual benefit out of the increased consumption for our own policy and for the position of the United States. But if they can buy more food with a subsidizing scheme, consumption, so that the price of the item in that country is low without breaking the international market on wheat."
And this became a big US program, and it's called US Aid. And it was the dumping of food to the third world. The US government would apportion money for foreign aid for countries in the third world on the condition that the money be used to buy American agricultural products, which were then sold in the market in those countries at below international markets, preventing them from starting an agricultural industry and becoming food independent and self-supporting. Because if they did that, then there would be employment in the countryside, and there wouldn't be massive pushes to urbanization. And whenever they pulled the plug on the food aid, they could topple a government because food prices would soar to international rates, and the poor people couldn't pay that. So they had a doggy chain on most of the countries in South America and Africa who accepted this, and even in the Far East. And a very evil program that destroyed the developing world and held actually back its development. But it's a tactic also used in the West. Why do you think those cell phones were being sold at like giveaway prices so long to hook you on? But once you're hooked on them, now you have to pay like $1,000 every, is it 12, 16, 18 months? And iPhone is always changing or something of that sort. And they did the same thing with computers and tablets and anything to get you hooked to the internet. And once you're hooked to the internet, it becomes an obligation to stay on the internet, and you're penalized. You can't even have a bank account unless you have a cell phone now and can go on the internet. And if you don't have any of that, most banks won't even give you an account. So it's first a freebie and then a chain, and then it's an obligation because it's a system of control. So one of the big lacks in this book, AJ, that you and I noticed this morning, what is it? We want to draw the attention of readers to this.
Yeah, so we were preparing to do a full show on the beginning that leads up to everything that leads up to Vatican II. And we wanted to discuss, how Roncalli got elected and everything, and well, he talks about the death of Pius XII, but then he goes directly into Roncalli calling the council. And if you don't realize there's a problem because, well, he has to get elected first.
And Time Life had a reporter in Rome who was covering that.
Yeah. Let me get her name here.
And she should have been featured in this book, which is about Time Life.
And her name is Dora Jane Hamlin, also known as Dottie. And she was the American senior Rome bureau chief for Life magazine. And she was the person in charge that covered the election of John the 23rd. I mean, this guy went everywhere to get all this information on everything going on. I mean, there's hundreds of pages on everything, but he only talks on one document on John the 23rd, Patra Materis, I think it was. But there was no long list of pages on John the 23rd himself, like he did on Pius XII.
Which is very, very strange because John the 23rd was on the front page of Time magazine 6 times, and he was even named Man of the Year in winter of 1963. So this is the book on Time Life magazine. He should have talked about that, and it's an empty space. We only ran into Dottie Hamblin's name in a memo that he does cite to Jackson about the opening of the council. But other than that, he hides her down the memory hole. This is, I would say, this is strange. It's a definite weakness in the book. And if you want to know more about Dottie Hamlin, you go to the New York Historical Society in Manhattan, and they have her files there, and they must be interesting. But we'll point out 2 programs we've already done. We did a whole program on the Gladio system, what that is, and that will be in the show notes. We did that last year. We did a whole program on the elected cardinal, Cardinal Ottaviani. He was or was not elected Pope in 58? And there's a copy of U.S. government telegram in that program. So we covered those 2 big sections that cover the story. But Jackson himself, who was the White House speechwriter, and he went on to become even the chief of staff for the White House. He actually met John the 23rd twice, and let's talk about that. So, what was the first time he met, and how did that happen?
Well, the first time he met John the 23rd was when President Dwight D. Eisenhower went to pay his respects and kiss the ring of the new elected Pope, and Jackson was in the administration with him, and so that is how he got in the first time.
Now,
the second,
wait, that first meeting, when did it take place?
1 year exactly after the election.
So that was December 6th, 1959.
Yeah.
And there's something strange. You know, we often talk about Masonic symbols, so we can't ignore this. So December 6th, 1959, what do you have there? You have December, that's 12, that's 2 6s. December 6th, that's another 6, so you have 3 6s. Then you have 1959, that's the 2 9s are 6s upside down, and the 5 and 1 is a 6. So you have a double 666 in that date. I think someone at the Vatican should have noticed that and said, we're certainly not going to meet with you on that day. But they did meet, and that's as if 2 followers of the Antichrist are meeting on the same day. What's the symbolism in that? I don't know, but I don't see why the Vatican should have had a meeting on that day. And I'm not saying John the 23rd was an Antichrist, but he's the one that did call the council.
Mhm.
And the author of this book that we're reading from, let's remind everyone of the book that we're taking most of the information from, AJ.
Yeah. It's a little different than Zoom. Here we go.
John Courtney Murray, Time's Life and the American Proposition. And the subtitle is
How the CIA's Doctrinal Warfare Program Changed the Catholic Church.
And the author's name
is David Wimhoff. He's a lawyer in South Bend, Indiana, and a law professor at Notre Dame University.
So he should have talked about John the 23rd, and he should have, if he's going to talk about Vatican II changing the church, he should have really put the responsibility on John the 23rd for calling it. But we found an interesting fact. A few days before he goes to St. Paul's outside the walls on January 25th, 1959, the U.S. government knows he's going to call a council. How's that, since he was only inspired by the Holy Spirit when he was there on January 25th?
Yeah. So it was a letter, Victorial Vicari to C.D. Jackson, letter dated January 23rd, 1959, with the policy of the Catholic Church in the selection and training of her leaders.
And there's something interesting in that quote. What does he say?
It tells you about the policy of the Catholic Church, how the people are selected, and how they are trained.
Did he say anything about John the 23rd in there?
And let's see here. And the next one was Ray Vickers, the Catholic Church, how it skillfully manages vast religious, social, economic, and diplomatic complex. Vatican allows local units much autonomy. It meets physical, personal problems. Wall Street Journal, October 6, 1960. Then everything else is in the Overseas Report, Confidential, number 4, from C.D. Jackson's papers, dated August 7th, 1962, in his files at the Dwight D. Eisenhower Presidential Library, Abilene, Kansas.
So they were gathering information right in the very week, or at least the report was being filed January 22nd. That would have been Week of Christian Prayer for Unity. I don't know if they had started that yet. I don't think that has yet started. The U.S. government was involved in watching what was going on. That's what I want to point out. So that was Jackson's first meeting with the Pope. His second meeting, August 7th, 1962. He's no longer head of the White House because Kennedy won the election. He's now chief editor of Life magazine.
And he's also a member of the board of the Pro Dio University, which is a CIA front.
Oh yeah, for infiltrating the Catholic Church and changing the leaders. Can you read his entire memo about John the 23rd from his meeting on August 7th? I think this is an important historical document.
Yeah. My second audience was in a smallish private room in the Vatican. There were actually a whole series of rooms strung out one after the other of different sizes. And depending upon the size of the room, there was a different size group. I was able to notice this because I had to go through the entire series of rooms in order to get to the leading one, the small one, with not more than 10 or a dozen people. But as I went through the others, I was able to see the size of the groups. The Pope's interpreter is Monsignor Ryan, 6'4", 250 pounds, no fat, and a wonderful brogue. He was the one who did the interpreting into English in St. Peter's. Monsignor Ryan warns you in advance that you are not supposed to ask questions, but simply to follow along with the conversation that will be initiated by the Pope, who has been briefed in advance as to who you are and why you are there and what your main interests are. As you stand around against the wall in the room, all of a sudden, another Monsignor comes in. Following him appears the Pope. He is a small, slightly round-shouldered, rather heavy man with a very benevolent face and bigger ears I have ever seen. Goes up, shakes hands, says a few words, listens in a friendly way, then moves on to the next person. When he came to me, he started talking in Italian. At a pause, Monsignor Ryan, who was next to him, broke in to tell the Pope that I spoke French, at which the Pope, in the most natural way in the world, said Bene, and started off in French. Very good French, but as I said before, with an Italian accent. He talked briefly about the importance of journalism in the modern world, with all the forces for good and evil that are at work. He mentioned Pro Dio as an organization that he was all for, then moved on to the next person in the most natural and friendly way imaginable.
So he has John the 23rd, August 7th, 1962, saying he's totally in favor of Pro Deo, which is CIA front for infiltrating the Catholic Church and changing her doctrine. Did John the 23rd know what he was talking about? We'll leave that to the speculation of history. So the council opens on October 11th, 1962, and this would be the last year of life of John the 23rd, who would pass away in August of the following year. Jackson, C.D. Jackson's in Rome. He's handling the coverage, and what can you tell us about that?
So, let me get this in here. So, in September 1962, Jackson commissioned Miss Iride Sorbonne to undertake a thorough study of the organizational and functional structure of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. The study explained in 12 pages of diagrams in the text of organizations of the Church's central sphere with emphasis on the Curia. It also explained each of the Church's regional spheres, which consisted of various diocesan bishops, and the power and functions of each of the various agencies and organizations within the Church. So he has learned from top down each way that the Church works, or how he can infiltrate it.
Yeah. When you do a hierarchical structure of an organization, it's because you want to know how to take control of it. And he receives an interesting note from Dottie Hamblin at the beginning of the council. Let's read that from a historical point of view.
So on September 24th, Jackson, fresh from his trip to Rome, wrote a letter to Monsignor Igno Carnelli, chief of protocol for the Vatican Secretary of State, asking that Cardinelli would make special provisions for putting one live photographer inside St. Peter's and on the official photographer stand for the opening day ceremonies on October 11th, and other important open sessions of the council. In exchange for the privilege, Life would portray this event in its full majesty and impact for the benefit of the council and the edification of the world. Since Life was without peer in the field of photographic journalism, admitting a Life photographer to the opening session was as much in your interest as in Life's. So, in that note, just right before the council, it was granted. And now it's been Dottie.
So this is how Life got a lot of Catholics to read their magazine, and what they got as news was actually the Masonic spin on the council. Well, it wasn't so much as the Masons were adding a spin that wasn't there; they were just accelerating what was already there. Very devious. So when liberal, secular, anti-Catholic media say they want to cover something, this is beware. So this is just everything leading up to the council, and Jackson being chief editor of Life magazine, and covering the coverage of the council is no small detail of history. This is the guy who founded the Bilderbergers. This is the guy who thought up the Gladio network. This is the guy who worked under Avery Dulles, Skull and Bones, worked with other Skull and Bones members. This is a man who was so intimate in the American Masonic scene and in the deep, what we call today the deep state or the globalist, that the fact that he was at the Vatican Council and got so much coverage there has to raise thousands of questions in any honest Catholic mind, because after the council, you see the church on a trajectory of globalism, and it's no longer on the trajectory of the Catholic faith. Most people don't know, for example, that at Vatican II, the Council Fathers voted on a document that said they were in favor of one world government. And that's the most shocking thing for the common Catholic in the Vatican II documents, which no one talks about. And that's an act of treason, because the one world government is not under Christ and has nothing to do with Christ. And that's not what the church is about.
So I was just leading up to setting everything up. And next few chapters are on between the Vatican Press and Time Inc. How the Vatican Press was to cover the questions and answers, just give the people little updates. Vatican and Time Inc. Oh, they told everything and twisted it. So you'll see that, you'll hear that in their own words.
And on February 14th, 2013, Pope Benedict warned the clergy of Rome that how the council was presented to the world by the media was not how the council was. Ratzinger has always been a big advocate of the council, and he made a very important historical observation that this author demonstrates, that the council of the media, as Pope Benedict calls it, was not the council that was actually called and what it actually said. But no one defended what it actually said, and we can cover that in another program. But we're going to show you how the manipulation went on and how American intelligence agencies were involved. It's just undeniable historical fact.
Yeah.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on this program of Ordo Militaris Radio TV.
You're welcome. Please like and share this program. Please get this book. It's $59, 990 pages. It should be over 1,000 with the forgotten information of Dottie, but still, it's a good book. Missing one person now. So you can get the book by clicking on the image in the show page on all the shows we do on this book. Get it. And hopefully if the author watches this, he learns about Dottie and goes and does an update to this book. Goes to New York and finds those documents.
That would be great.
So this is Ordo Militaris Radio TV signing off. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.